West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains are home to America's newest national park. The New River Gorge protects one of the most impressive canyons in the eastern United States, numerous important historical sites, and an extremely biodiverse wildlife corridor. It also provides ample hiking opportunities and some of the best rock climbing and whitewater rapids in this part of the country.
I'm Ryan with Focus on the Parks. Today we'll explore this park's rich natural and cultural history. We'll offer some practical advice to visitors, and we'll see how this park compares to other parks in the park system. So let's get to it. Welcome to New River Gorge National Park. The first Europeans to explore the New River Gorge were led by Abram Wood in 1654, authorized by the Virginia legislature. For a while, this river was called Woods River, but it gradually became known as the New River, which is not particularly original. There are at least 15 other new rivers in the United States alone.
What these early colonial cartographers would not have appreciated at the time is, the New River is potentially among the oldest rivers in the world. The exact age of the New River is a bit controversial. Geologists consider the New River a remnant of a much older river called the Teays River, which began in what is now North Carolina and meandered its way across the future states of Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois during the Pleistocene, around 2 to 3 million years ago, before its course was altered by Ice Age glaciation to form the modern Ohio River system. But the New River itself could be considerably older than the Teays, potentially as old as 320 million years.
That figure of 320 million years is actually the age of the youngest rocks at the uppermost levels of the gorge. Since the river cuts through rocks of that age and older, the river must be no older than 320 million years.
It is worth noting that this is about 100 million years older than the Appalachian Mountains themselves, an ancient mountain range which began to rise slowly around 225 million years ago. The fact that the New River cuts right across the Appalachians is a big piece of evidence that the New River is older than the mountains that surround it. If this is the case, then the New River eroded the Appalachians as they rose, gradually carving the gorge that characterizes the park landscape today, and locking in the course of what we now call the New River for hundreds of millions of years. Of course, there are other pieces of evidence that point to a much younger river. Most major rivers in the United States erode their surrounding rock at a rate of around 1 foot every 6,000 years. Applying this rate to the depth of the New River Gorge gives a much younger estimate of around 10 million years old, an age that would be much more appropriate for a river called New.
Today, the New River Gorge is among the deepest canyons in the eastern United States, measuring 876 feet deep at the New River Gorge Bridge and about 1,400 feet deep at Grandview. There are 7 dams across the full length of the New River, but none within the present park or preserve. The river here remains more or less in its wild natural state, dropping at a rate of about 11 feet per mile as it flows northward. As the river descends, it provides some of the best whitewater rafting opportunities in the eastern United States, with rapids of all raftable difficulty levels 1 through 5. Many of the most intense rapids on the river are within the boundaries of the national park between Thurmond and the New River Gorge, with such colorful names as the Meat Grinder, Dudley's Dip, and the Bloody Nose. Braving the park's rapids is a really great way to get a different perspective on the park and add some excitement to your stay. Those looking for a milder experience can raft the Class 1 through 3 rapids in the upper portion of the river within the National Preserve.
The story of coal at New River Gorge starts before there was a gorge or a river. Some 360 million years ago, this part of West Virginia was a low-elevation swamp. These wetlands were dominated by dense vegetation such as horsetails and large tree-like ferns. Over the course of a few thousand years, the decaying remains of this plant matter formed peat. And as layers and layers of peat were buried under sediments and subjected to heat and pressure, the peat turned into bituminous coal. Coal was discovered in the New River Gorge in 1742, but it would be a while before there were any organized efforts to extract it. This was partially due to demand issues. The Industrial Revolution and its huge appetite for coal wouldn't hit the United States until the end of the 19th century. And this was partially due to supply issues. Coal mining requires dedicated access to transportation and supply lines. Meanwhile, the coal beds here are often situated on sheer cliffsides within the deep gorge alongside an unnavigable river. Simply put, coal mining at the New River Gorge wouldn't be practical until there was dedicated infrastructure in place to support it. This issue was solved with the arrival of the railroad. By the 1850s, railroads connected much of the eastern portion of the state of Virginia, but rail access to the western part of the state was limited, in large part due to the geographical barrier imposed by the Appalachian Mountains. Initial plans were made in 1853 to extend a rail line west from Clifton Forge, Virginia, all the way to the Ohio River near Point Pleasant. Before this could be made a reality, the Civil War caused massive disruptions to the South's railway lines, and the situation became even more complicated in 1863, when the western portion of the state of Virginia was admitted to the Union as the separate state of West Virginia. These complications were more or less settled by the end of the Civil War, and the C&O Railway Company began planning a cross-Appalachian route in the late 1860s. In choosing a route across the mountains, the New River Gorge had obvious advantages. A natural canyon cutting straight through the mountains provided a more or less level and direct route to the Ohio River. The C&O began construction along the eastern bank of the New River in 1869, opening the route to commercial traffic in 1873. The arrival of the railroad made coal mining in the New River Gorge more practical, and mines started popping up in anticipation of the completion of the railroad. John Nuttall and Joseph Barry began their mining operations in 1871, and in the decades that followed, nearly 50 mines cropped up along the New River Gorge. One of the best preserved mining settlements within the modern park is John Nuttall's own Nuttallburg. Visitors can see numerous remnants of the Nuttallburg mining operation, including a covered conveyor that was used to transport coal down the mountain, a tipple over the railroad tracks that workers used to load coal onto railroad cars, and numerous foundations and ruins of a town that supported the mining operations. Because of the remote nature of the area, company towns like Nuttallburg were all-inclusive communities that included doctors, schools, churches, and stores for miners and their families. The stores in particular were highly profitable for mining companies, as they could effectively recoup much of the wages that were paid to their miners. As a result, miners were heavily dependent on mining companies for nearly every aspect of their lives, and many would become stuck in cycles of inescapable debt to their employers. Coal mining along the New River began to decline during the Great Depression, and after a brief resurgence during World War II, mining operations along the New River ceased in the post-war period. Nuttallburg, for example, shut down all production in 1958. The mining towns along the gorge experienced steep population decline, and most were abandoned as job opportunities dwindled. Coal is still a small but significant industry in West Virginia and a key part of the state's cultural identity, but the remaining communities along the New River would ultimately need to chart a different and more sustainable economic course. Most national parks in the United States are centered on stunning natural features such as the Grand Canyon or Yosemite Valley. Others are centered on cultural and historical resources such as hot springs and Mesa Verde. New River Gorge does a bit of both, of course. The gorge itself is a remarkable scenic focal point for the park, and its historic resources are extensive. But it's hard to deny that the most famous icon of the park is neither natural nor historic: the towering single-span arch of the New River Gorge Bridge. Today's remarkable bridge isn't the only span across the New River Gorge, and it wasn't the first. In its shadow, you'll find a more modest river crossing, which is now part of the Fayette Station Road Scenic Drive. This bridge, now called the Tunney-Hunsaker Bridge, was originally built in 1889 to connect the mining towns of Fayette and South Fayette. Fayette Station Road is part of today's national park and a lovely, leisurely way to see various elevations of the park from canyon rim to water level. However, as America began to build out its highway system in the 1950s and 1960s, the 45-minute drive from rim to rim simply wasn't fast enough.
Construction on the New River Gorge Bridge started in 1974, and it was completed and opened in October of 1977, cutting the transit time across the gorge down to less than a minute. At the time it was built, this was the highest roadway bridge in the world at 876 feet above the river. Although that record has been broken many times since, it is now the third highest bridge in the United States and the highest in the eastern part of the country. Besides being on postage stamps, state quarters, and about 1,000 different West Virginia tourism publications, the New River Gorge Bridge is notable for a handful of extreme activities you can't partake in other national parks. On the third Saturday of every October, the bridge is closed to vehicle traffic for Bridge Day. This allows visitors to walk or run the span of the bridge, but it also allows for base jumping, which I believe is the only example of legally permitted base jumping within a U.S. national park. If you miss out on Bridge Day but are still looking for an extreme bridge-related activity, take a look at the Bridge Walk Tour.
For about $75 a head, you can take a guided tour across the narrow maintenance catwalk underneath the main span of the bridge.
West Virginia is nicknamed the Mountain State, but it didn't actually receive a full-fledged national park until 2020, a journey that took over 60 years. And like many national parks, this journey started with the proposal for a dam.
In the early 1960s, Appalachian Electrical Power began investigating the creation of a series of dams along the upper New River in Virginia.
Dubbed the Blue Ridge Project, the dams would have flooded more than 42,000 acres along the river and decimated communities, rich farmlands, and of course the wild character of the river itself.
Local opposition to the project grew, and many downstream communities in West Virginia and Virginia were concerned about the environmental impacts to their communities.
This opposition culminated in the 1976 designation of 26.5 miles of the river in North Carolina, a national wild and scenic river.
As activists celebrated their victory in protecting the North Carolina stretch of the New, many began turning their sights towards West Virginia and the New River Gorge.
The debates in West Virginia in Congress were less focused on whether the gorge should be protected and more focused on how best to go about it. Two camps emerged, one group that wanted to create a national park and another who wanted to create another wild and scenic river like the North Carolina segment. This debate would reveal the inadequacies behind both proposals. On the one hand, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act of 1968 requires that protected lands with that designation must include no more than a quarter mile of land on each side of the riverbank, which would leave vast swaths of the wide New River Gorge unprotected. On the other hand, the lands to be protected included several active mines and railway lines, which are not typically included in full-fledged national parks. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, many congressmen and locals wanted to preserve hunting access in the gorge, which is almost universally banned in full national parks. So a compromise was reached, and in November 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed legislation from Congress to create the New River Gorge National River. Initially, much of the land within the designated boundaries of the National River was privately owned, and intentionally so. Park management in the late 1970s and early 1980s was focused on establishing public-private partnerships to ensure that the New River Gorge would receive the protection it needed without a lot of federal investment. Private developments and residential expansion would soon reveal the problems with this management plan, and the government began buying up private in-holdings within park boundaries in the late 1980s. As the government was buying up park in-holdings, it was also authorizing legislation to expand the National River. Most significant of these was the acquisition of Grandview State Park, which the state of West Virginia ceded to the federal government in 1990. In 2018, West Virginia's congressional delegation began floating a proposal to upgrade this place to a national park. And just like in 1978, there were concerns about hunting. And just like in 1978, a compromise was reached. West Virginia senators looked to the National Park and Preserve model that had previously been used in Alaska at a number of sites. Legislators would ultimately set aside 4 subsections of the National River: Canyon Rim, Thurmond, Grandview, and Sandstone Falls, with the designation of New River Gorge National Park. Meanwhile, the remaining 90% of the National River would carry the designation of New River Gorge National Preserve. Hunting would be permitted within the National Preserve lands, but not within the national park proper. This compromise was passed by Congress and signed by President Donald Trump in December of 2020 as part of that year's Omnibus Appropriations Bill. So here's my quibble with the redesignation of the New River Gorge National Park. This is a stunning landscape, and it absolutely deserves to be a national park, except New River Gorge National Park and Preserve is barely a national park. Counting only the national park lands, this is the 3rd smallest park in the country. And it's also the only national park and preserve where the preserve lands are larger than the park lands. And it's not even close. It's pretty clear that the authors of the legislation to make this place a national park were doing the bare minimum to put national park on the signs, basically as a cynical move to get more tourist dollars in the area, and it's working. Visitation was up by 60% in New River Gorge's first full year as a national park and has increased ever since. I worry that this increase in visitation could put visitors at risk during hunting season. The National Park Service cautions that hunting is prohibited within 500 feet of areas heavily trafficked by visitors, and that hikers during hunting seasons should consider wearing blaze orange as a precaution. I'm not even sure I own anything in blaze orange,
And how many international visitors or van life vloggers are going to be paying attention to minutia like, where does the park end and where does the preserve begin?
Meanwhile, West Virginia is not lacking in alternative public and private lands where hunting is allowed. New River Gorge absolutely deserves to be a national park, but it also deserves more than it got. I like to think this could be remedied by future legislation, but if anything, Congress seems to think this is a model worth emulating. Since 2020, similar national park and preserve proposals have been made for Okmulgee Mounds, Delaware Water Gap, and Apostle Islands.
Will these units also be redesignated with bare minimum efforts?
Ultimately, time will tell, but I do have my doubts. New River Gorge National Park is situated in a rural area in a rural state, so suffice to say, access to a car is imperative. The closest major airport is West Virginia International Yeager in Charleston, although there's also a small regional airport in Beckley. Larger airports in Louisville, Charlotte, or Pittsburgh are all at least 3.5 hours away. If you're planning a road trip between national parks in the eastern United States, there are several good options within a 3 to 4 hour drive of New River Gorge. There are also a number of other nearby sites run by the National Park Service, most notably Gauley River National Recreation Area and Bluestone National Scenic River, both of which are co-administered alongside New River Gorge. New River Gorge is a year-round park, although like most parks, it receives its highest visitation in the summer. Weather in the park is relatively mild, with average highs in the summer generally in the high 70s or mid-80s. New River Gorge remains open in the winter, although one should be prepared for the possibility of winter storms affecting their trip. Another big draw is on the third Saturday of October when the park celebrates Bridge Day. For just this one day, the New River Gorge Bridge is closed to vehicular traffic, and visitors can walk, run, rappel, or even base jump off of the bridge. October is also the best time to view fall foliage if you want a little extra color for your visit.
The Park Service operates 8 primitive campgrounds, but all are within the National Preserve, not the National Park. The only camping option within the park itself is a single group campsite near the Canyon Rim Visitor Center. Backcountry camping is also possible on some of the park's remote trails, again, primarily within the preserve.
As the park is rather spread out, there are a number of nearby communities with food and lodging. The most prominent of these is Fayetteville, at the northern end of the park near the bridge, which has a handful of campgrounds and hotels to choose from. State parks are another great lodging alternative in the area, as there are several nearby. Hawks Nest State Park, immediately north of the park, even has a full lodge for visitors looking for a roof over their head. There are a ton of great activities to do at New River Gorge National Park for visitors of every ambition level. You might be surprised to find decent auto touring within a park this small, but the 45-minute Fayette Station Road Scenic Drive is a great way to see the park from the canyon rim to the riverside. Just keep in mind the road is steep and narrow with sharp curves, so trailers and RVs are discouraged. Hikers will find about 35 miles of trails within the national park proper and a comparable amount within the preserve. Trails in the park tend to be moderate with less than 1,000 feet of elevation gain, but there are a few strenuous trails with steep segments. New River Gorge is an excellent destination for climbers with over 1,400 established routes and heights ranging from 30 to 120 feet up sheer cliffs of hard Nuttall sandstone. Most of the routes here are considered best tackled by advanced climbers. Whitewater rafting opportunities are numerous as well, with a number of local outfitters offering 1 to 2 a day excursions on the river. Rapids here run the full gamut of difficulties from Class 1 to Class 5. Some of the most extreme rapids on the New are within the Canyon Rim unit of the National Park. Less intense journeys can be found upriver in the preserve. Now that we've learned some natural, historical, and practical facts about New River Gorge National Park, let's see how it stacks up against other parks in America's park system. Please keep in mind these categories are only ranking New River Gorge National Park, not the attached preserve lands. First up are the preservation categories, which score a park on its natural and cultural resources. Expanse ranks the park on its overall size. New River Gorge is one of the smallest national parks in the U.S. park system, but it does get a small bump for the attached preserve, scoring a 2 out of 10. Diversity assigns a score according to the number of resources protected at the park. New River Gorge has a decent score for a small little park, 14 resources, which earns a 4 out of 10. Superlativity is a rating of how exceptional the park's resources are. The New River Gorge itself is one of the oldest rivers in the world, and the New River Gorge Bridge is the largest single-span arch bridge in the U.S. and the highest bridge in West Virginia. This is enough to earn the park a score of 5 out of 10. Biodiversity is a score of the park's plant and animal diversity. New River Gorge shines here, with over 2,700 species recorded on the National Park Service directory, earning a perfect 10 out of 10. Uniqueness compares the park's protected resources against those of other parks in the U.S. park system. New River Gorge doesn't offer a lot of standouts here, so it earns a 1 out of 10. Add up the preservation categories, and New River Gorge earns a preservation subtotal of 22 out of 50. Now, on to the visitation categories, which score the park on its visitor experience. Reachability rates how easy the park is to access. New River Gorge is within a day's drive of several national parks and provides decent airport access as well, earning a score of 7 out of 10. Interactivity assigns a score based on the number of activities guests can partake in. A count of 15 activities earns New River Gorge a 6 out of 10. Explorability is a measure of the park's road, trail, and visitor center infrastructure. New River Gorge has multiple visitor centers and decent trail coverage for such a small park, earning a 4 out of 10. Accommodations ranks the park on its overnight access. The only overnight option outside the National Preserve is a single group campsite, but I'll count it and give New River Gorge a 3 out of 10. Finally, scenery is a subjective score of the park's natural beauty. New River Gorge is a beautiful place, no doubt, but perhaps not at quite the same scale as some of the park system's most famous destinations, so I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Adding everything up, New River Gorge gets a visitation subtotal of 27 out of 50 and an overall score of 49 out of 100.
All in all, New River Gorge is a really impressive place, but I think it's really held back by its size.
If we were counting the full park and preserve for the purposes of its score, it would score higher in the expanse, explorability, and accommodations categories, and would take its rightful place alongside other revered parks in the system.
As it stands, it's a nice little park, with an unfortunate emphasis on little. So that's it for New River Gorge National Park. If you like this video, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Focus on the Parks for more videos like this on other parks in America's park system. Until next time.